Most people think online political content looks the way it does, because that's just what people believe. But that's not really what's happening. A lot of it looks that way because that's what works. And once something works, it doesn't just get used, it gets repeated. And over time, it starts to shape the content itself. So a video about global conflict turns into a story about a few NBA players. And that's not random, it's structural. There was a recent video from a sports creator, Rusty Buckets, talking about the situation in Gaza. And instead of focusing mainly on governments or institutions, it centered on NBA players. Big names, Curry, LeBron, Durant, framed in a very direct, moral way. Strong language, clear conclusions, and a push toward more political content going forward. And to be clear, the humanitarian situation is real, and it matters. This isn't about dismissing that, it's about understanding why the video is structured the way it is. And if you take that kind of video seriously, a lot of it makes sense. Raising awareness matters. Using your platform to talk about real-world issues, that matters. And if public figures have influence, it's reasonable to ask questions about how they use it. And none of that is wrong. In fact, if your goal is urgency, this is exactly how you would communicate. Before you even hear the argument, you see the thumbnail. Familiar faces, clear moral framing, and in that moment, the story is already about them.
Kevin Durant, LeBron James, and Stephen Curry are pretty much the three faces of an entire generation of the NBA. The generation of the NBA that I grew up on. My favorite player of all time is Stephen Curry. My favorite player of all time to hate on is Kevin Durant, and I have defended LeBron primarily as a player time and time again. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan, but I also think people say some ridiculous things about this guy, especially as a basketball player.
And within seconds, the focus is already set. Not the system, not the institutions, the people. And that matters. Because thumbnails don't just get clicks, they assign responsibility. Complex systems are hard to explain. Wars, governments, global economics, those don't fit neatly into a video. But people do. So the story shifts from systems to individuals. And once that happens, the audience has something familiar to focus on. A global conflict becomes easier to follow because it looks like a story about people you already know. Because this is where the shift happens. Because it's not just simplifying the story, it's changing it. What gets attention isn't complexity, it's clarity. And clarity online usually means strong, direct conclusions. So over time, the content moves toward that. Not necessarily because it's more accurate, but because it performs better. What gets rewarded doesn't stay a tactic, it becomes the format. And the audience plays a role in this, because creators don't just make content, they respond to it. What gets engagement gets reinforced. And what gets reinforced gets repeated. And over time, the line between what you believe and what your audience responds to starts to blur. And this doesn't just shape the message, it shapes the incentives around it. Because content like this doesn't just spread, it performs. It gets views, it drives engagement, it builds an audience around that tone, and over time, it creates a feedback loop where the strongest framing is also the most rewarded. And eventually, what performs well starts to feel like what's true. And that doesn't make the creator dishonest, but it does mean they're operating inside a system where performance and belief start to overlap. In a lot of these videos, the emotional conclusion comes first. Strong language, high stakes, clear moral framing.
Palestine's population is over 40% children, meaning since October 7th, Israel has killed at a minimum, conservatively, 30,000 children. Let me say that again, 30,000 kids. It has been 864 days since October 7th at the time of recording, meaning on average, Israel has conservatively been killing 35 children a day. This is what Curry and Durant are invested in. This is what LeBron has only heard good things about. And it's fucking disgusting, and I'm really tired of the lies, both from these players, but primarily from the American propaganda apparatus that we live under.
And once that tone is set, everything else follows it. The conclusion is already clear, before the structure is fully built. And that order matters, because once the conclusion is set, everything else gets interpreted through it. The people in the video are the easiest to see. They're famous, recognizable, familiar, but they're not the ones structuring the outcome. They're not setting policy. They're not directing aid. They're not designing the system itself. And when attention stays on them, the actual centers of power stay out of frame. And to be clear, this doesn't mean creators shouldn't talk about politics, or that athletes shouldn't be questioned. That's not the issue. The issue is how responsibility gets framed. Because explaining a system is different from assigning blame. And those two things get collapsed very easily online. This isn't just about one video. It's about how online discourse works. Complex problems get turned into simple narratives. Systems get replaced with individuals. And accountability gets redirected toward the people who are easiest to see. But the people who are easiest to see become the focus, even when they're not the ones shaping the outcome. And who gets made visible isn't neutral. Because visibility doesn't just carry attention, it carries meaning. And when the focus stays on a few recognizable figures, it can start to stand in for something larger than them, even when the system itself remains out of frame. And if the goal is actually understanding what's happening, you have to look past what's easiest and toward what's